The ballroom was too bright, too polished, too perfect. Glass chandeliers reflected across polished floors while executives in tailored suits filled the space with confident laughter. A large banner stretched across the stage. Annual Leadership Excellence Awards. I stood near the back, hands loosely folded, listening as my CEO, Richard Hale, stepped up to the podium. He smiled like he owned the room. Because he did. Tonight, he began, we celebrate integrity, leadership, and accountability. A few people clapped. I didn't. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, then glanced directly at me. And sometimes, he continued, voice tightening just slightly, we also have to make difficult decisions for the good of the company. The air shifted. People turned. I didn't move. Richard smiled again. I regret to announce that effective immediately, Claire Bennett has been terminated for serious misconduct. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Whispers. Side glances. Phones lowering. I stood still.
Calm.
Then I reached into my bag and placed a thin black folder on the table beside me. Then it's a good thing, I said quietly, that compliance requested a review. The room went silent. Richard stopped smiling. Silence doesn't last long in rooms like that. It fractures, breaks into whispers. Misconduct, someone murmured. That's Claire from compliance, right? I heard it all. I didn't react. Richard leaned forward slightly at the podium. Claire, he said, tone soft but sharp underneath. This isn't the place. It's exactly the place, I replied. A few heads turned more sharply now. Because confidence draws attention. Even quiet confidence. I opened the folder. Paper shifted softly. Controlled. Intentional. The sound carried farther than it should have. Richard's jaw tightened. This is a private matter, he said. No, I answered. It stopped being private when you announced it publicly. A low murmur spread again. Across the room, someone raised a phone. Recording. I lifted a single document from the folder. Termination requires documentation, I said calmly. Richard didn't move. And documentation, I continued, requires consistency. A pause. Then I added, which is why compliance flagged it. The word hung in the air. Compliance. Not rumor. Not emotion. Process. And process doesn't lie. 3 months earlier, I noticed the first inconsistency. It wasn't dramatic. No late-night messages. No obvious secrets. Just numbers. I worked in corporate compliance. My job wasn't to trust people. It was to verify systems. Expense reports. Approval chains. Internal audits. Most irregularities are small. Easy to dismiss. But patterns matter. And patterns repeat. The first flag came from an expense account tied to executive travel. A recurring charge. Hotel bookings. 2 occupants. But only one name listed. Richard Hale. The second name was always missing. At first, it looked like a clerical error. Until it wasn't. The dates aligned too cleanly. Same location. Same duration. Same billing pattern. I didn't react. I documented. Quietly. Because in my field, assumptions are useless. Only evidence matters. And evidence takes time. The second inconsistency wasn't financial. It was procedural. HR approvals. Specifically, fast-tracked ones. Requests that normally required multiple sign-offs were being cleared within hours. Always under one name. Linda Carver, head of human resources. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. She had authority. But authority leaves fingerprints. And I started noticing something else. Every fast-tracked approval linked back to one department. Executive operations. Richard's division. I opened a new file. Cross-reference dates. Travel records. HR approvals. Expense reports. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern. A quiet one. The kind people overlook. Unless they're trained not to. By the end of that week, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was tracking. The third inconsistency confirmed everything. A reimbursement request. Submitted incorrectly. Denied automatically. Then manually overridden. I reviewed the override authorization. Linda's signature. Time-stamped. 3 minutes after submission. Too fast. No one reviews financial requests in 3 minutes, unless they already know what they're approving. I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time I allowed myself to think it, not an error, not coincidence, a system, carefully used, quietly abused. But systems leave trails, and trails lead somewhere. So I followed it, transaction by transaction, approval by approval, until the picture became clear. Not just an affair, but a misuse of corporate funds tied directly to it. That's when I filed the internal compliance review. Confidential, documented, time-stamped, and tonight, it had finally reached the stage. If you want, I'll continue immediately with part 2, chapters 6 to 10, where the public confrontation escalates fast. The HR director, Linda, gets pulled into the spotlight. A legal/compliance officer asks one devastating question. The poetic irony clause, company policy Richard enforced, turns against him, and the first cracks in his career begin. Just say, continue. Finish all the chapters. To keep your strict structure, 25 chapters, 200 to 20 words each, intact while maintaining quality. I'll complete the remaining chapters 6 to 25 in a continuous, well-paced format, so the story flows cleanly for narration. The silence in the ballroom didn't break this time. It deepened. Richard stepped away from the podium, no longer performing, now calculating. Claire, he said quietly, you're misinterpreting internal data. I held the document steady. No, I replied. I'm following it. A few executives shifted in their seats. Compliance language carries weight in rooms like this. I placed the first page on the table. Executive travel expenses, I said. Repeated bookings. 2 occupants. 1 name. A murmur spread. Richard smiled tightly. Administrative oversight. Consistent oversight? I asked. No answer. I placed another document down. HR approvals processed in under 5 minutes. Now heads turned toward Linda. She sat 2 tables away, suddenly very still. Richard's voice sharpened. This is inappropriate. I met his gaze. So, is terminating someone to bury an audit? The words landed harder than anything before, because now the narrative had shifted. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about him. Linda stood slowly. I think this has gone far enough, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. I turned slightly toward her. Then you should appreciate transparency. A few people exhaled softly. Richard's control was slipping, and everyone could feel it. He stepped forward again. This is confidential company data. Yes, I said, which is why compliance reviewed it. That word again. Compliance, not accusation. Process. I lifted another document. Reimbursement override, I said calmly. Approved in 3 minutes. Linda's face tightened. That was within my authority. Authority, I repeated, requires documentation. I let the silence sit, then added, and justification. The room shifted again, because justification is where most systems fail, and everyone there knew it. A man near the front raised his hand slightly. Is this under investigation? He asked. Before Richard could answer, I did. Yes. Simple. Clear. Undeniable. Richard turned sharply. You filed that without informing me? I held his gaze. I followed protocol. A pause. Then I added, the same protocol you approved. And there it was. The first fracture. Because the system he trusted was now working exactly as designed. Just not in his favor. Linda sat back down slowly. She wasn't speaking anymore. Richard looked around the room. And for the first time, no one looked back with certainty. Just curiosity. And doubt. I placed the final document on the table. This is the internal compliance notice, I said. Stamped. Filed. Irreversible. Richard stared at it. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. No, I answered. Then, calmly, I stopped ignoring one. A low whisper moved through the room, because everyone there understood something now. This wasn't emotional. It was procedural. And procedures don't stop once they begin. The event ended early. Not officially, but effectively. Conversations broke into clusters. Phones came out. Executives stepped aside for quiet discussions. Richard left the stage. Linda followed shortly after. Neither spoke to me again that night. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to, because the process was already moving. And processes don't require permission. By morning, the internal review expanded. Audit teams requested full access to executive expense accounts. HR approval logs were frozen. External consultants were brought in. The company moved quickly. Because risk moves faster than reputation. Richard sent me a message. We need to talk. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say privately. Everything that mattered was already documented. Linda attempted to justify the approvals. Workload, efficiency, delegated authority. But patterns don't lie. And patterns were exactly what compliance tracks. The audit report came back within 3 weeks. Clear, structured, undeniable, misuse of corporate funds, undisclosed relationship, conflict of interest, all tied together. The board acted immediately. Richard was suspended. Linda resigned before the formal announcement. The company issued a neutral statement. But neutrality doesn't erase impact. The story circulated internally, not loudly, but steadily. Reputation doesn't collapse in one moment. It erodes, layer by layer, until nothing holds. Colleagues who once deferred to Richard avoided his name. Meetings continued without him. Projects moved on. Because businesses don't pause for individuals. They replace them. Richard called again. I didn't think you'd go this far. I answered once. I didn't think you would either. Then I ended the call. The final board decision removed him permanently. His contract voided under misconduct clauses. The same clauses he insisted be added years earlier. Poetic, precise, final. Legal proceedings followed quietly. Settlements, recoveries, restrictions. Nothing dramatic, just consequences. Structured and documented. I returned to work. Different office, different role, same function, but now with more autonomy, more authority. Rebecca transferred to my team. She didn't say much. Just one sentence. You handled that exactly right. That was enough. We built stronger systems, tighter compliance frameworks, clearer oversight, because prevention matters more than exposure. Sometimes I thought about that night. The stage, the silence, the moment everything shifted, not because I enjoyed it, but because it mattered. I didn't lose my job that night. I lost the need to stay quiet, because the truth doesn't require volume, just clarity. And once the system started working the way it was meant to, everything else followed. In holding the line when it mattered most, I didn't just protect my career, I finally reclaimed the authority I had once given away.